For Sarah Jenkins, the 55th floor of the Beaumont Tower was a world she cleaned, but never belonged to. A ghost in the machine of high finance, she moved through the silent, opulent halls after dark, armed with a spray bottle and a cart full of cleaning supplies. Her life was a relentless cycle of exhaustion, driven by the need to provide for her ailing son. But one fateful night, a simple mistake led her into the one office she was forbidden to enter, the personal sanctum of the city's most enigmatic billionaire. And there, on a vast mahogany desk, nestled between documents worth millions, sat a small photograph that shattered her reality. It was a picture of a little girl with a missing tooth and bright, hopeful eyes. It was her. The smell of citrus-scented disinfectant and industrial-grade coffee was the perfume of Sarah Jenkins's life. It clung to her clothes, her hair, and she was sure deep in her pores. At 34, she looked older than her years, a weariness etched into the fine lines around her eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. Her hands, though perpetually clean from sterilizing solutions, were rough, the knuckles calloused from pushing a heavy janitorial cart for 8 hours a night, 5 nights a week. Tonight was a Tuesday in the sweltering heart of a Chicago August. The city buzzed with a frantic energy far below, but up here, on the 55th floor of the Beaumont Tower, the only sound was the low, omnipresent hum of the building's climate control system. This was the Eagle's Nest, the executive floor, home to the offices of Beaumont Industries' top brass. It was a realm of brushed steel, smoked glass, and carpets so plush they felt like walking on a cloud of silent money. Sarah wasn't supposed to be here. Her usual route was floors 20 through 25, the mid-level management sector, a land of monotonous cubicles and slightly less expensive art. But Maria, her partner on the night shift, had called in sick. A text message vibrating in Sarah's pocket an hour ago had been the bearer of bad news. "Stomach flu. So sorry, amiga. Can you cover exec?" Sarah had sighed, her breath fogging a small patch on the window overlooking the glittering sprawl of the city. Covering the exec floor meant another 2 hours, pushing her shift past 4 a.m. It meant less sleep before she had to be up to get Noah ready for his summer program. It meant a deeper, more profound ache in her lower back. But it also meant overtime, and with Noah's upcoming cardiology appointment, every extra dollar was a soldier in a war she felt she was constantly losing. "No problem. Feel better," she had texted back, the lie tasting like ash in her mouth. The 55th floor was different. It felt heavier. The air was perfumed not with disinfectant, but with something subtle and expensive. Leather, maybe a faint trace of cologne that smelled like rain on clean stone. The art on the walls wasn't the generic corporate fare of the lower floors. These were originals, moody landscapes and stark, challenging abstracts, each one probably worth more than her apartment building. Her supervisor, a perpetually stressed man named George, had given her the rundown. "Just the basics, you Sarah. Vacuum, trash, wipe down the surfaces. Don't touch anything on the desks. And whatever you do, stay out of the corner office. Mr. Beaumont's office. He has a private cleaner who comes in during the day. His assistant, Ms. Rush, is very particular. We don't go in there, ever." Sarah had nodded, her face a mask of weary compliance. "Got it, George. Stay out of the big boss's office." She started her work, moving with an efficiency born of a decade in the industry. Her cart glided silently over the deep gray carpet. Trash cans were emptied, their meager contents, gourmet coffee cups, crumpled printouts, disappearing into her large black bag. She sprayed and wiped down conference tables that gleamed like black mirrors, their surfaces reflecting the ghostly image of a tired woman in a drab gray uniform. She was an invisible force, erasing the day's evidence, preparing the stage for the next performance of power and wealth. The floor was a horseshoe shape. She worked her way around, her movements automatic, her mind on Noah. His breathing had been a little shallow this morning. He'd tried to hide it, of course, with the same brave face he always wore, but she saw it. She saw everything when it came to him. The doctors used words like mitral valve prolapse and monitoring, words that hung in the air of their tiny apartment like a constant threat. The specialists, the medications, the potential for surgery, It was a mountain of financial dread she climbed every single day. An hour bled into the next. She was nearing the end of the horseshoe, her muscles screaming in protest. All that was left was the final suite of offices. According to the layout, this was the domain of the C-suite, ending with the forbidden corner office. She emptied the trash in the CFO's office, then the COO's. They were just as sterile and immaculate as the rest. Then she came to the last door before the corner. The nameplate on the wall simply read, I, Roche, Executive Assistant. This was the gatekeeper. The office was unlocked, as expected. It was smaller than the others, but ruthlessly organized. Pens were aligned in a perfect row. A single, pristine notepad sat beside a keyboard. Not a speck of dust dared to settle here. Sarah quickly emptied the small bin and was about to leave when she noticed the adjacent door, an inner office connector, was slightly ajar. That was the door to his office, Mr. Beaumont's office. George's warning echoed in her head. Stay out. We don't go in there. Ever. She should have just closed it, ignored it, finished Miss Roche's office and moved on. But a strange, inexplicable curiosity took hold of her. What did the world look like from the very top? What kind of man was Adrian Beaumont, this faceless titan whose name was plastered all over the city on buildings, on charity wings at hospitals, on the very uniform she wore? The newspapers called him a recluse, a genius, a ruthless negotiator. They said he'd built his tech empire from the ground up, a modern-day Midas. It was just for a second, a quick peek. No one would ever know. Her heart hammering against her ribs, Sarah pushed the door open just a fraction more and slipped inside. The breath caught in her throat. If the rest of the floor was opulent, this was something else entirely. It was less an office and more a cathedral of power. One entire wall was a seamless pane of glass, offering a breathtaking 180-degree panorama of Chicago sleeping under a blanket of indigo and diamond dust light. The desk wasn't the standard corporate mahogany. It was a colossal piece of dark, polished wood that looked like it had been carved from a single ancient tree. A vast, intricate Persian rug covered the floor, its patterns deep and complex. The air smelled different in here, richer, carrying the scent of old books, leather, and that same stony, rain-like cologne. She felt like an intruder, a peasant who had stumbled into the king's throne room. Her worn, rubber-soled shoes felt sacrilegious on the priceless rug. She stood frozen for a moment, simply absorbing the sheer scale of it all. This room was bigger than her entire apartment. The view alone was a declaration of dominance over the world below. Her training kicked in, a frantic instinct to find a justifiable reason for being there. She spotted a small, overturned wastebasket near the desk, probably knocked over by Ms. Roche earlier. It contained a single crumpled piece of paper. Okay, she told herself, her mind racing. I came in to empty this. That's it. I saw it from the door. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was something. She crept forward, her movements furtive. The silence was unnerving. She could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. She bent down, picked up the wastebasket, and emptied the single ball of paper into her bag. As she straightened up, her gaze fell upon the surface of the great desk. It was remarkably clear. A sleek, dark laptop, closed, a heavy silver pen lying in a groove, a stack of files bound in blue covers, stamped with the word confidential in stark red letters. And next to them, propped up in a simple, elegant silver frame, was a photograph. It wasn't a picture of a smiling wife or perfect children, the kind of photo she expected a man like this to have. It was small, no bigger than her hand, and it looked old. The color was slightly faded, the edges soft. Curiosity, that dangerous, traitorous impulse, won again. Leaning closer, she peered at the image, and the world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face, leaving her dizzy and cold. The humming of the building faded into a deafening roar in her ears. She felt a wave of nausea so intense she had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from falling. The photograph was of a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, with a gap-toothed grin and wild curly hair tied into 2 unruly pigtails. The girl was wearing a faded yellow sundress and stood in front of a peeling brick wall. But it wasn't just any little girl, it was her. She knew it with a certainty that was absolute and terrifying. She remembered that dress. It had been her favorite, a hand-me-down she'd cherished. She remembered that missing front tooth, which had taken forever to fall out. She remembered the scraped knee, just visible below the hem of the dress. The face in the photograph was Sarah Jenkins, decades younger, a lifetime ago. Her mind fractured, trying to make sense of the impossible. How? Why? How could a photograph of her as a child from the forgotten depths of the foster care system, a child who had no family to take such pictures, be sitting on the desk of Adrian Beaumont, one of Ahe's wealthiest and most powerful men in the country? Her first thought was a violation. Had he been watching her? Was this some sick, twisted game? A powerful man's creepy obsession with one of his lowliest employees? The idea sent a spiderweb of ice through her veins. She felt exposed, vulnerable, a bug under a magnifying glass. She reached out a trembling hand, her fingers hovering just over the cool glass of the frame. She wanted to snatch it, to prove it was real, but she was terrified of leaving a fingerprint, of leaving any evidence of her transgression. A sound from the outer office, the soft click of a door, jerked her back to reality. Panic, sharp and blinding, seized her. Ms. Roche, security. Without another thought, Sarah spun around and fled. She didn't look back. She slipped through the connecting door, pulling it almost shut behind her, scurried out of Miss Roche's office, and pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway with a speed she didn't know she possessed. Her heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of her ribs. She didn't stop until she reached the service elevator, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing her in the sterile metal box, she leaned her head against the cool wall, closing her eyes. But all she could see was the ghost of a little girl in a yellow sundress, smiling out from a silver frame in a billionaire's lonely office. A ghost that was somehow, impossibly, her. The night was no longer just long and tiring. It was now steeped in a terrifying mystery that had her name and her face at its very center. The ride down in the service elevator was a descent into a personal hell. The familiar, slightly greasy smell of the lift felt suffocating. Sarah's mind was a frantic kaleidoscope of questions, each one more frightening than the last. The image of the photograph was burned onto the back of her eyelids. Who is he? How does he know me? Is he dangerous? She fumbled her way through the rest of her shift in a daze, cleaning floors 20 through 25 with the clumsy, unfocused movements of an automaton. Every shadow seemed to lengthen. Every innocuous sound made her jump. The hum of the building no longer sounded like a machine. It sounded like it was breathing, watching her. She felt eyes on her from every security camera, every darkened window. The tower, once just a workplace, now felt like a cage, and she was a trapped animal. When she finally clocked out at 4:17 a.m., the pre-dawn air of Chicago, thick and humid, did nothing to clear her head. The bus ride home was a blur. She stared out the window at the passing streetlights, but saw only the gap-toothed smile of her younger self. Her apartment, a cramped two-bedroom in a walk-up in Pilsen, usually felt like a sanctuary. Tonight, it felt like a flimsy shelter that could be breached at any moment. She checked the locks 3 times before tiptoeing into Noah's room. He was sleeping, his small chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. A mop of dark, curly hair, so much like her own, was splayed across his pillow. For a moment watching him, the terror subsided, replaced by a fierce, primal wave of protective love. This was why she endured the back-breaking nights, the exhaustion, the invisibility. For him, the thought that some powerful, unknown man might have an interest in her, and by extension, in Noah, was a new and profound kind of fear. Sleep was impossible. She sat at her small kitchen table, a cup of untouched tea growing cold in her hands, until the first gray light of dawn filtered through the window. The photograph. It had to be a mistake, a coincidence. Maybe it was just a girl who looked like her, but she knew with a gut-wrenching certainty that it wasn't. She knew the faint scar above the girl's left eyebrow from when she'd fallen off a swing. It was her. The next evening, She arrived at work with a knot of dread in her stomach. She saw Maria by the time clocks, looking pale but recovered. "Hey, you're a lifesaver," Maria said, giving her a weak but grateful smile. "How was the eagle's nest?" Sarah forced a shrug, trying to keep her voice steady. "It was fine. Quiet. Lots of shiny things I'm not allowed to touch." "Tell me about it," Maria laughed. "George would have a heart attack if we so much as breathed on Beaumont's desk. They say the man can tell if a paperclip has been moved." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Really? That's the legend anyway. Total control freak from what I hear. And his assistant, that Roche woman? She's like a guard dog in designer heels." The conversation solidified Sarah's fear. She couldn't tell Maria. It sounded insane. "Hey, I broke the #1 rule, went into the billionaire's office, and found my baby picture on his desk." They'd think she was crazy, or worse, they'd report her, and she'd be fired. Losing this job wasn't an option. It was the only thing standing between Noah and a medical system that would chew them up and spit them out. For the next week, Sarah lived in a state of heightened paranoia. She did her work on the lower floors with her head down, avoiding eye contact, speaking to no one unless necessary, but her mind was always 30 floors above in that silent, cavernous office. The mystery was a splinter in her mind, impossible to ignore. Then one evening, the carefully constructed wall between her world and his was breached. She was buffing the lobby floor, the machine's drone a familiar comfort, when the main elevator bank chimed. It was late after 9 p.m., long after most employees had gone home. The doors slid open and a small group of people emerged, deep in conversation. 2 men in sharp suits, and in the middle, a woman Sarah recognized instantly from company newsletters. Isabelle Roche, her dark hair pulled back in a severe chignon, her face set in a mask of intense focus, and walking slightly ahead of them, commanding the space without a word, was a tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit. He wasn't handsome in a conventional movie star way. His features were sharp, angular, with a strong jaw and dark, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. His hair was dark, with distinguished flecks of silver at the temples. There was an aura of stillness and immense coiled energy about him. Even from across the vast lobby, Sarah felt the sheer force of his presence. It had to be him, Adrian Beaumont. Sarah's instinct was to become invisible. She maneuvered the buffer behind a large marble pillar, her heart pounding. She watched as Miss Roche said something to him, gesturing towards the exit. He nodded, but then he paused. His gaze, which had been directed forward, swept across the lobby. It was a casual, sweeping glance, the kind a king might give his domain. But as his eyes passed over her hiding spot, they stopped. For a split second, his eyes met hers. It was like a physical jolt, a low-voltage current that shot through her. There was no recognition in his expression, no flicker of malice or familiarity. It was just focus, an intense, unnerving focus, as if he were cataloging her, filing her away. The moment lasted no more than 2 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Then he turned, said a final word to his companions, and was gone, disappearing through the revolving doors into a waiting black car. Sarah leaned against the pillar, her knees weak. He'd seen her. It wasn't a coincidence. That look, it felt like he had been looking for her. The paranoia ramped up. A few days later, George called her into his small, cluttered office. "Sarah," he started, shuffling papers and avoiding her gaze. "Got some news. Management is restructuring some of the custodial contracts, a new employee welfare initiative." He said the words like they were foreign and suspicious. "They're creating a few daytime positions. Better pay, standard hours. They offered one of them to you." Sarah stared at him. "A day shift? Why?" "Beats me," George grumbled. "Supposedly, they picked a few employees at random from the long-term night crew. For work-life balance, you'd be assigned to the executive floors, 45 to 55. Floors 45 to 55, the eagle's nest, during the day. This was not random. This was a move, a calculated, deliberate move. He was pulling her into his orbit. The fear was now mixed with a terrifying, bewildering sense of importance. Why? What did he want from her? I don't know, George, she stammered, the thought of being up there in the light, visible to everyone, terrifying her. I'm used to the night shift. It's a 20% pay raise, Sarah, George said, finally looking at her. And full health benefits for you and your dependents. Top-tier plan. I saw the paperwork. It's the plan the VPs get. Top-tier health benefits. The word struck her like a lightning bolt. A plan that would cover all of Noah's specialists, his medication, the potential surgery, without the crippling co-pays and deductibles that were bleeding her dry. It was the answer to her prayers, and it was being handed to her by the very man who was the source of her deepest fears. It was a golden cage. He was luring her in with the one thing he knew she couldn't refuse. I'll take it, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The decision felt like both a surrender and a declaration of war. She would walk into the lion's den, but she would do it with her eyes open. She had to know. For herself and for Noah's safety, she had to uncover the truth behind the photograph. Her first day was surreal. Wearing a slightly newer, crisper uniform, she rode the main elevator up, her cleaning cart feeling comically out of place next to men and women in suits worth more than her car. The 55th floor was a hive of quiet, intense activity. Phones buzzed, voices were kept low and purposeful. And then she saw her. Isabel Roche stepped out of her office holding a tablet. She saw Sarah, and for a fraction of a second, her professional mask slipped. A look of pure, unadulterated annoyance flashed in her eyes before being replaced by icy neutrality. You're the new day porter, Ms. Roche stated, her voice as crisp as a new $100 bill. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. Sarah Jenkins. I am aware, Ms. Roche said coolly. Your duties are outlined on the sheet HR provided. You will service the common areas, the kitchen, and the conference rooms. You will restock supplies. You will not enter any private offices unless expressly requested, especially not Mr. Beaumont's office. Is that clear? The emphasis was unmistakable. It was a warning. I know you were in there. Sarah's heart hammered, but she met the woman's gaze. Perfectly clear. Ms. Roche gave a curt nod and turned away, her dismissal absolute. The battle lines had been drawn. For the rest of the day, Sarah worked under the hostile gaze of the executive assistant. She could feel Ms. Roche's eyes on her whenever she passed. It was a war of attrition, but as the day wore on, another feeling began to dawn on her. She wasn't just being watched by Ms. Roche. She was being watched by him. She would be wiping down the coffee station, and a reflection in the polished chrome of the espresso machine would show his door opening. Mr. Beaumont standing there for a moment before turning back inside. She would be collecting recycling bins from a conference room, and he would walk past in the hallway, his steps silent, his presence immense. He never spoke to her. He never acknowledged her. But she felt his awareness of her like a change in the atmospheric pressure. The game had changed. She was no longer a ghost in the night. She was a piece on his chessboard, and he was slowly, deliberately, moving her closer to the king. The question that screamed in her mind was no longer just, why? It was, what happens when I get there? The golden cage was both a blessing and a curse. The new salary and the phenomenal health insurance were life-altering. Sarah was able to schedule Noah's appointment with a renowned pediatric cardiologist at Northwestern Memorial without the familiar, sickening dread of how she would pay for it. For the first time in years, a sliver of financial daylight pierced the oppressive gloom of her life, but the cost was her peace of mind. Every day on the 55th floor was a masterclass in psychological tension. Adrian Beaumont remained a distant, silent planet, his gravitational pull felt but never seen up close. He moved through the floor like a phantom, occasionally visible through glass walls or for fleeting moments in the hallway. Each time Sarah felt his gaze, a brief but laser-focused attention that made the hair on her arms stand up. It wasn't lecherous or overtly threatening. It was something far more unnerving. It was analytical. It was searching. Isabel Roche, on the other hand, was a constant, icy presence. She made her disapproval clear in 1,000 subtle ways. A pointed glance at a non-existent smudge, a sharp question about why the coffee pods hadn't been refilled yet, an unnerving habit of appearing silently behind Sarah as she worked. It was a campaign of intimidation, designed to make Sarah feel unwelcome and out of place. Sarah understood. Ms. Roche was protecting her boss, and Sarah was the unexplained anomaly, the wrench in the gears of their perfectly calibrated world. The photograph remained the central, tormenting mystery. Sarah's nights, once spent in exhausted sleep, were now filled with a desperate search through the fog of her own memory. The foster system had been a revolving door of strange houses, strange parents, and the constant, aching feeling of being unwanted. It was a past she had deliberately walled off, a place too painful to revisit. Now she was forced to pick at the bricks, searching for a clue. The photo was taken at an orphanage. She was sure of it. The peeling brick wall, the general state of her worn dress, it spoke of institutional life. She remembered the name, a name that tasted like thin soup and scratchy blankets. St. Jude's Home for Children. It had been on the city's west side, a grim Gothic building that was torn down decades ago to make way for a freeway. One Saturday with Noah at a friend's house, Sarah took a bus to the Chicago Public Library's main branch, a place she hadn't been in years. In the hushed quiet of the history department, she started digging. She searched for records of St. Jude's, anything that might list the children who were there around the time the photo was taken, which she guessed was about 1998. The search was frustrating. The home had been privately run, and when it closed in 2002, its records were scattered, lost, or sealed. She found a few old newspaper articles about its closure, citing funding issues and deteriorating conditions. She found architectural plans and photos of its demolition, but she couldn't find what she was looking for, a list of names. Defeated, she started looking up Adrian Beaumont instead. The public story was well known, a prodigy who started a software company in his college dorm room, which he then built into the global behemoth of Beaumont Industries. But it was the personal details, or lack thereof, that caught her attention. Every biography, every profile, mentioned it in a single unadorned sentence. Adrian Beaumont was adopted as a child. There was never any more detail. No mention of his birth parents, his original name, or where he was adopted from. His past was a fortress, as impenetrable as his office. The connection was there, a fragile thread in the darkness. An orphan who became a billionaire. A photograph of an orphan girl on his desk. Both of their pasts were shrouded in the same kind of mystery, originating from the same system. Were they at St. Jude's together? She closed her eyes, trying to force a memory. The clang of the dinner bell, the smell of bleach, the splintered wood of the playground seesaw, and then a flicker. A fragment of a memory, hazy and unreliable. A boy, a little older than her, with serious, dark eyes. A boy who didn't talk much, but would sometimes share his stolen cookie with her. A boy she called Danny. Was that his name? Danny? It felt right. She remembered sitting with him on the cracked steps behind the kitchen, the two of them watching the sun go down. She remembered a shared secret, something they promised never to tell. But the memory was like smoke, dissolving the moment she tried to grasp it. A new memory surfaced, stronger this time. A lullaby, a soft, simple tune. A nun, Sister Agnes, used to sing to the younger children who cried at night. But Sarah didn't remember it from Sister Agnes. She remembered it from the boy, Danny. He would hum it sometimes, a tuneless, childish hum when she was scared of the dark. The moonbeam sails on a silver sea. Stars in the sky watch over thee. The words came back to her, a ghostly echo from a buried time. The melody was melancholic and sweet. She hummed it softly to herself there in the library, the tune a key to a door she hadn't known existed. Back at work, the tension escalated. Adrian Beaumont began to subtly close the distance. One afternoon, as she was replacing the water bottle in the cooler, he walked up, a glass in his hand. He didn't ask her to move. He just waited patiently. She was so flustered, her hands fumbled with the heavy bottle. "Allow me," he said. His voice was deep and calm, with no hint of condescension. He effortlessly lifted the bottle and settled it into place. "Thank you, sir," she mumbled, her eyes fixed on the floor. "There is no need to call me sir," he said gently. He filled his glass and paused, looking at her. It was the first time they were this close. She could see the intelligence in his eyes, but also something else, a deep, profound sadness. "What is your name?" "Sarah," she said, her voice tight. "Sarah Jenkins." He nodded slowly, as if committing it to memory, though she was certain he already knew it. "Sarah," he repeated softly, tasting the name. "Thank you, Sarah." And then he was gone, walking back to his office. The brief encounter left her shaken. He was real. He was not a monster, not a creep. He was a man with a quiet sorrow in his eyes, and he had said her name. The incident was not lost on Isabel Roche. Later that day, she intercepted Sarah near the elevators. "A word, Ms. Jenkins," she said, her voice sharp. Sarah turned, her heart sinking. "I am not sure what you think you are accomplishing here," Ms. Roche began, her tone low and venomous. "But I have been with Mr. Beaumont for 15 years. I protect his interests. I protect his privacy. He is a very generous man, but he is not to be trifled with. Whatever little game you are playing, whatever you think you might gain by catching his eye, end it. You are an employee. Remember your place." The condescension, the accusation in her voice ignited something in Sarah. After weeks of fear and confusion, a spark of anger flared. "My place?" Sarah replied, her voice shaking but firm. "My place is doing the job I was hired for. A job, I might add, that I didn't ask for. I'm here to work, Ms. Roche. That's it. If you have a problem with my work, take it to my supervisor. Otherwise, I would appreciate it if you would leave me alone." Isabel Roche was momentarily stunned into silence, clearly not expecting any form of resistance. Her lips thinned into a furious line. "Consider yourself warned," she hissed before turning on her heel and stalking away. The confrontation was terrifying, but also liberating. Sarah felt a small measure of her own power return. She wasn't just a pawn to be moved around. She was a woman, a mother, and she had a right to know why her life had been so mysteriously and inextricably linked with that of the man in the corner office. That night, she put Noah to bed. He was feeling better, his energy levels higher since they'd adjusted his medication under the new doctor's care. As she tucked him in, he looked up at her. "Sing me the moon song, Mommy." Sarah froze. "What moon song, sweetie?" "The one you hum sometimes, when you're washing dishes, about the moonbeam." She hadn't even realized she was doing it. The lullaby from St. Jude's had surfaced from her subconscious. She looked at her son, her beautiful, brave boy, and the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. She had to stop being afraid. She had to stop waiting for him to make a move. She was going to confront Adrian Beaumont. She would walk into that office, look the most powerful man in Chicago in the eye, and demand the truth. The ghost of the little girl in the photograph deserved an answer. The decision once made settled in Sarah's soul like a block of concrete. The fear didn't vanish, but it was now overshadowed by a steely resolve. She spent the next 2 days rehearsing what she would say, her imaginary speeches swinging wildly between righteous anger and trembling vulnerability. This had to be on her terms. She decided to act at the end of the day. The late afternoon was a quiet time on the 55th floor, a lull before the executives departed. Most of the support staff would be gone, and crucially, Isabel Roche usually had a standing 4:30 p.m. video conference call in a soundproofed meeting room down the hall. It was a small window of opportunity, but it was the only one she might get. At 4:25 p.m., Sarah stood with her cleaning cart outside the executive suite, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She saw Ms. Roche walk past, tablet in hand, a frosty look on her face as she headed toward the conference room. The door clicked shut behind her, now or never. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Sarah abandoned her cart and walked the long, silent corridor to the corner office. The heavy wood door seemed immense, a barrier to another world. She didn't knock. Knocking could be ignored. She turned the cold steel handle and pushed the door open. Adrian Beaumont was not at his desk. He was standing by the vast window, his back to her, looking down at the city. He didn't turn around, but he spoke, his voice calm and resonant, as if he had been expecting her. "I wondered how long it would take," he said. The sound of his voice, not in a polite hallway greeting, but in this charged private space, almost made her lose her nerve. She took a step inside and closed the door softly behind her, the click echoing in the cavernous room. "You need to tell me what's going on," she said, her voice stronger than she expected. "You need to tell me why you have my picture." He finally turned from the window. The searching, analytical look was gone. In its place was an expression of profound, weary sadness, the same sadness she had glimpsed before, but now laid bare. "Please," he said, gesturing to one of the plush leather chairs that faced his desk. "Sit down, Sarah." "I'd rather stand." He gave a small, sad smile. "Of course. I suppose I haven't given you much reason to be comfortable around me." He walked over to his desk but didn't sit behind it, a gesture she recognized as an attempt to lessen the power imbalance. He leaned against the front of it, near the photograph in its silver frame. "You have every right to be angry and frightened," he began. "The way I've handled this has been clumsy, I see that now. After all this time, I didn't know how to begin." "Begin with the truth," she shot back, her anger flaring again. "How do you have a picture of me from when I was a child? Were you watching me? Is this some kind of sick game?" He flinched, the accusation hitting him like a physical blow. "No, God, no. Nothing like that." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "My name wasn't always Adrian Beaumont. The family who adopted me gave me that name. The name I was born with was Daniel." Sarah's breath hitched. Danny, the name from her fragmented memories. It couldn't be. "I was at St. Jude's," he continued, his voice growing softer, more distant. "From the time I was 8 until I was 10. It was a hard place, cold. But there was this little girl there, a tiny thing with wild hair and the bravest smile I had ever seen. She was always getting into scrapes, but she never cried. She was younger than me, and I felt protective of her." The room began to spin. Sarah sank into the chair he had offered, her legs no longer able to support her. "Her name was Sarah," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "And she was my sister." The word hung in the air between them, electric and impossible. "No," Sarah whispered, shaking her head. "No, I was alone. I was always alone. I don't have a brother." "You do," he insisted, his voice thick with emotion. "Our mother. She couldn't take care of us. She brought us to St. Jude's together. We promised we'd stick together. We were all we had." He reached for the photograph and held it out to her. "This was taken by one of the nuns the week before everything changed. It was the only picture we had." Sarah's mind was a maelstrom of denial and a terrifying dawning recognition. The boy with the serious eyes, the shared cookies, the promise behind the kitchen. It was real. "Why?" she choked out. "If you're my brother, why did you leave me there? Why did you never come back?" Tears welled in Adrian's eyes, and he didn't try to hide them. "I didn't have a choice. I was 10 years old. A wealthy couple, the Beaumonts, came to adopt. They had wanted a son. They chose me. I begged them to take you too. I screamed, I fought. But they only had approval for one child. The agency, the home. They said it was for the best. They told me you'd be adopted soon, that you'd go to a good family. They promised me." He looked away out the window, his jaw tight with the memory of a decades-old pain. "The Beaumonts were good people. They gave me everything, a new name, an education, opportunities I could never have dreamed of. But I never forgot. I never stopped looking for you." "But you're Adrian Beaumont," she said, the name sounding absurd now. "You could find anyone." "I tried," he said, his voice raw. "The moment I had my own resources, I started searching. I hired the best private investigators in the world. But it was like you had vanished. St. Jude's closed. The records were a disaster. You were moved from there into the foster system, and your last name was misspelled on a transfer document. Just one letter off, Jenkins instead of Jenkins. It sent the trail cold for years. We were looking for the wrong person." He let out a long, weary sigh. "We searched for years. We hit dead end after dead end. I started to lose hope. I thought something might have happened to you. The photo was all I had left, a reminder of my promise." "So how did you find me?" she asked, her voice a whisper. "It was the most impossible irony," he said, a humorless smile touching his lips. "About a year ago, My lead investigator, a man named Paulson, decided to try a new approach, a wide data mining search looking for demographic matches instead of names. Age, place of birth, general location, thousands of potential results. He was cross-referencing them against employment records in Chicago when he got a hit. A woman named Sarah Jenkins, with the right age and background markers, working as a night shift janitor for a company contracted by Beaumont Industries. In my own building? He shook his head in disbelief. For 6 months you were here, under my roof, and I didn't know it. Paulson did a deep background check, found your birth certificate, and confirmed it. It was you. My little sister was cleaning my offices. The sheer, staggering coincidence of it all was too much to comprehend. Sarah felt a wave of dizziness. All those lonely nights, pushing a cart, feeling invisible, while upstairs her brother, her billionaire brother, was desperately searching for her. The day porter job, the insurance, she murmured. I had to get you out of that night shift. I had to get you closer, he confessed, and my investigators told me about your son, Noah, about his heart condition. I couldn't stand by and let you struggle when I could help. But I was a coward, Sarah. I saw the fear in your eyes when I looked at you in the lobby. I realized I was just some strange, powerful man stalking you. I didn't know how to tell you the truth without you running. He took a tentative step closer. Our mother, before she left us, she used to sing us a lullaby. Do you remember it? Sarah looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. She nodded slowly. In a low, slightly hesitant voice, Adrian began to hum and then sing the words that had been echoing in Sarah's own subconscious. The moonbeam sails on a silver sea. Stars in the sky watch over thee. Sleep now, my love, and peaceful be, for morning's light will set you free. That was it. The final wall of her denial crumbled into dust. The memories came flooding back, not as fragments, but as a vivid, emotional torrent. Danny, her brother, her only protector in that cold, lonely place. The tears she had held back for a lifetime broke free. Sobs racked her body, a storm of grief for the years they had lost, for the little girl left behind, for the boy who had been forced to leave her. Danny closed the distance between them and wrapped his arms around her. He held her as she cried, his own tears falling into her hair. It was not the embrace of a billionaire for a janitor. It was the embrace of a brother who had finally, after a lifetime of searching, come home. I'm so sorry, Sarah, he whispered, his voice cracking. I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. In the silent, opulent office, high above the city that had separated them for so long, a ghost and a king were finally reunited. They were no longer Adrian Beaumont, the titan of industry, and Sarah Jenkins, the invisible cleaner. They were just Danny and Sarah, a brother and a sister who had found their way back to each other across an impossible chasm of time, tragedy, and circumstance. The future was an unknown country, but for the first time in either of their lives, they would not have to face it alone. The storm of tears subsided, leaving a fragile, surreal calm in its wake. Sarah pulled back from her brother's embrace, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, looking at him, really looking at him, for the first time. The sharp, powerful features of Adrian Beaumont softened, and in the lines around his eyes and the gentle curve of his mouth, she could see the faint ghost of Danny, the serious boy from the steps of St. Jude's. The sheer strangeness of it all was overwhelming. One moment she was a cleaner, the next, the long-lost sister of a billionaire. I don't know what to say, she whispered, her voice hoarse. You don't have to say anything, Danny replied, his own voice thick with unshed emotion. We have years to talk, a lifetime. Just then, the office door clicked open. Isabel Roche stepped in, her face a mask of cold fury, her eyes already zeroed in on Sarah. Mr. Beaumont, I must insist that you let me handle this intrusion. She stopped short, her words freezing in her throat. The scene before her was incomprehensible. Her impeccably composed boss, his eyes red-rimmed, standing beside the janitor, who looked not terrified, but emotionally shattered. Adrian turned, and the authority in his voice was absolute, yet devoid of its usual corporate chill. It was personal. Isabel, that's enough. He took a protective step closer to Sarah. This is Sarah Jenkins. She's my sister. Isabel Roche's perfectly maintained composure finally cracked. Her jaw went slack, and a flicker of utter disbelief and confusion crossed her face. She looked from Adrian to Sarah and back again, her mind clearly unable to process the statement. For 15 years, she had guarded the fortress of Adrian Beaumont's past, and now the biggest secret of all was standing before her in a gray janitor's uniform. Ignoring his assistant's shock, Adrian turned his full attention back to Sarah. "Let's get out of here. I'm taking you home." "You don't have to do that," Sarah stammered, the habits of her old life dying hard. "Yes," he said, his tone gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. "I do. I want to meet my nephew." The ride in his sleek, silent black car was a blur. Sarah sat numbly on the soft leather, watching the familiar streets of Chicago pass by through the tinted windows. It felt like watching a movie of someone else's life. When they arrived at her humble walk-up building, the contrast between his world and hers was stark. Adrian didn't seem to notice. He followed her up the worn steps, his expensive shoes silent on the linoleum. Noah was in the living room, building a complex structure with Legos. He looked up as they entered, his bright, curious eyes immediately landing on the tall stranger with his mother. "Mom, you're home early," he said, before looking at Adrian. "Who's that?" Sarah's heart lodged in her throat. Adrian knelt, not as a towering adult, but bringing himself down to Noah's level. "Hello, Noah," he said, his voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it. "My name is Danny. I'm your mom's brother." Noah tilted his head, a miniature version of Sarah's own skepticism. "Mom doesn't have a brother." "Well," Adrian said with a small, genuine smile, "it's a long story, but I think we're going to be great friends. That's an amazing spaceship you're building." As Sarah watched her brother and her son begin to talk, their shared familiar dark curls and serious eyes creating an undeniable echo of family, she knew her world had irrevocably changed. The fear and confusion that had plagued her for weeks finally gave way to a fragile, burgeoning hope. The road ahead would be complicated, full of adjustments and learning to bridge the vast canyon between their lives. But as she looked at the two most important people in her universe, together in her small living room, it felt less like an ending and more like the first, breathtaking page of a brand new chapter. Sarah's story reminds us that beneath the surface of our ordinary lives, extraordinary connections can lie dormant, waiting for a single fateful moment to change everything. It's a powerful testament to the fact that our past never truly leaves us, and that the bonds of family can endure even the most impossible distances. From the lonely nights in a silent tower to a reunion that would redefine her entire world, Sarah's journey is a tale of hope, resilience, and the incredible twists of fate that connect us all in ways we can scarcely imagine. If this story of reunion and the unbreakable strength of family touched your heart, please show your support. Hit that like button as it truly helps our channel grow. Share this video with someone who needs a story of hope, and most importantly, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next real-life drama. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.